August 15, 1975, was a day marked by sun-filled skies and excitement, not just for the Harrington family, but for the entire Marple Township community. The Bible camp at Trinity Christian Reformed Church had long been a well-established summer tradition in the area. Pastor David Zandstra, known for his kind demeanor and reputation as a devout man, oversaw the camp. For parents like Mark and Jennifer Harrington, sending their daughter to this camp was an act of trust, a gesture that reflected their faith in their church community. That morning, Gretchen wore her favorite white sundress, her blonde hair neatly tied into a ponytail, and a smile that could brighten any room. She was excited to spend the day with other children, singing songs, learning Bible verses, and taking part in the usual camp activities. Her parents waved her goodbye, certain they would see her again later that afternoon. Yet, as the hours passed and Mark Harrington arrived at the church to pick up his daughter, there was an unsettling emptiness in the air. Zandstra, who had been managing the camp, was the last known adult to have seen Gretchen that day. He had offered her a ride to the camp, seemingly innocent concerned faith leather, right? The fact that Gretchen Harrington didn't show up after the camp's conclusion sent shockwaves through the small community, sending Mark and Jennifer into a desperate frenzy. The search began immediately. Local police, community volunteers, and church members joined forces to canvass the nearby woods and surrounding areas. Investigators started with the possibility of a wandering child, an accident, or some other innocent explanation. But with each hour that passed, the feeling that something was wrong grew stronger. As police combed through the campgrounds, the authorities had no leads, and nothing seemed amiss. Zandstra's initial statement, where he claimed that Gretchen had gone into the camp and was later seen briefly leaving, seemed strangely disjointed. The following days were a whirlwind of action and emotions. The media descended upon Marple Township, reporting every detail and amplifying the already intense pressure on law enforcement. Detective William Thompson, a seasoned investigator with years of experience, was assigned to the case. In his interviews with Pastor Zandstra, he noted that Zandstra's answers didn't match up with the evidence at the scene. Yet there was no definitive proof to link him directly to Gretchen's disappearance. As the investigation continued, Zandstra's behavior became increasingly odd. While his public persona as a trusted pastor remained intact privately, there were moments when he seemed detached from the emotional gravity of the situation. This raised suspicions among those involved in the case. Jennifer Harrington, Gretchen's mother, was particularly unsettled by Zandstra's demeanor during interviews. There was something about him, something in the way he seemed almost too calm, that made her skin crawl. Despite his strange behavior, there was no physical evidence to charge him. Zandstra's role as a respected church leader and his calm, collected presence made it difficult to move forward. At the time, law enforcement had limited resources to pursue further investigations into Zandstra's background. Physical evidence like fingerprints and DNA samples were still relatively rudimentary, and there was no concrete proof that Zandstra was directly involved. By the time the search was called off and the investigation stalled, Gretchen Harrington was presumed dead by most. Yet Mark Harrington and his family refused to give up hope. Jennifer Harrington, a mother whose heart couldn't accept the possibility of never seeing her daughter again, relentlessly kept the memory of Gretchen alive, always clinging to the belief that one day the truth would be revealed. Years passed, and the case slowly slipped into the shadows. The once vibrant memories of Gretchen Harrington's infectious laughter and sunny disposition began to fade. As time wore on, the community moved forward. Pastor Zandstra, meanwhile, continued his life as if nothing had happened, maintaining his position within the church and his role as a respected member of society. By the late 1980s, the investigation was largely considered a cold case. Mark and Jennifer Harrington still held on to their belief that one day the truth would be uncovered, but the passage of time and the absence of evidence made it difficult to remain optimistic. The emotional toll on the family was immense. Mark Harrington began privately questioning Zandstra's involvement more than ever before, yet, without anything concrete to go on, he had no way to prove his suspicions. In interviews over the years, Mark Harrington would confess that the hardest part wasn't just losing his daughter, it was the gnawing feeling that the person responsible was living freely, a member of the very community that had supported the Harringtons during their darkest days. Zandstra's role in the church allowed him to remain an almost untouchable figure. His connection to the Harrington family's tragedy never wavered, even as the years continued to pass. For Jennifer, the burden of grief was compounded by a feeling of helplessness. She would often visit Gretchen's room, sitting on the bed that still held traces of her daughter's presence. Her favorite books, stuffed animals, and artwork cluttered the space. Jennifer's soul-wrenching pain, while hidden from the world, remained a constant undercurrent that drove her to continue her search for answers. She frequently visited the local police station, speaking with detectives, trying to keep the case from being completely forgotten. By the early 2000s, advancements in forensic science had changed the way old cases were handled. DNA testing had become an indispensable tool in criminal investigations. What was once a cold case was now ripe for re-examination. Law enforcement agencies began reviewing files of unsolved cases, applying modern techniques to evidence that had been collected decades earlier. The process was slow, but investigators were determined to leave no stone unturned. In 2012, with the advancement of forensic DNA testing, investigators revisited the evidence from Gretchen Harrington's case. There had been physical evidence collected from the scene at Trinity Christian Reformed Church, but it had never been processed due to the lack of modern technology. After submitting the samples to the state's forensic lab, investigators were stunned to find that Zandstra's DNA was a match. This moment of revelation, when the DNA finally linked David Zandstra to the crime, was the turning point in the case. The forensic breakthrough not only confirmed that Zandstra was involved, but also provided a solid foundation for reopening the investigation. The news of this breakthrough was devastating to the Harrington family, but it also brought a renewed sense of hope. A possibility that after decades of heartache, they might finally get the answers they had been searching for. When David Zandstra was arrested in 2022, the news was met with disbelief and shock. Pastor Zandstra, now living in Michigan, had long since distanced himself from Marple Township. He had built a new life for himself, far removed from the painful past that he had left behind. However, the truth had caught up with him. The arrest was made possible by modern investigative techniques, and Zandstra's surprise was palpable when law enforcement officers arrived to take him into custody. For Mark and Jennifer Harrington, it was a bittersweet moment. Mark Harrington was interviewed immediately after the arrest, his voice shaking as he processed the flood of emotions. His anger and relief were palpable, but so was the sorrow that the years of unanswered questions had caused. The mystery of Gretchen's fate had taken decades to unravel, and while justice was being pursued, it couldn't bring back the daughter they had lost so long ago. The prosecution laid out the evidence, which now included not just DNA, but also the testimony of experts who described how forensic advancements had brought the case to the forefront. At some point during the day, Zandstra lured Gretchen away from the group under the pretext of needing help with something. His calm demeanor and position of authority made him someone the children at the camp were conditioned to trust. He led Gretchen away from the others, and once they were out of sight, he abducted her. What followed was a horrific chain of events. Zandstra took Gretchen to a secluded area where he sexually assaulted her. The full extent of the abuse she endured would never be fully understood by her family, but what is known is that Gretchen's life was brutally cut short. Zandstra then took the unimaginable step of killing her, concealing her body to hide the evidence of his crime. The defense team, unable to refute the overwhelming evidence, tried to focus on Zandstra's past as a religious figure and his positive reputation in the community. But nothing could erase the chilling reality of his actions. The jury deliberated for several days, and when the verdict finally came, David Zandstra was convicted of kidnapping, sexual assault, and first-degree murder. Zandstra was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Let me know, what do you think of this case and which you would like to see next? Till next time.